Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. No matter what time zone you're in right now, welcome back to Sip and Talk.
Welcome, Sip and Talkers. Hey, have you ever noticed how we use these crazy terms for everyday things?
All the time.
I'm trying to diet right now, but I told my friends I'm on an energy intake decluttering journey.
An energy intake decluttering. I love that. It sounds so much better than I can't eat cake.
Exactly. Or, when your boss cancels your vacation at the last minute, he doesn't say I'm ruining your trip. He calls it a flexible capacity adjustment. It's this art of making something awful sound completely neutral, even positive.
It's a human art form, and in political science, there's actually a term for it. It's called Orwellian language. The idea that you can reshape reality just by changing the words you use to describe it.
And which country do you think has absolutely perfected this?
Oh, I don't even have to guess.
Right. It makes me think of this classic idea, this pocket logic.
Okay, what's that?
Imagine a store clerk catches you with your hand in the candy jar. He says you're stealing. And you look him dead in the eye and say, I'm not stealing, I'm just placing the candy in my pocket.
Yeah.
And now I happen to be walking out.
The facts are the same, the candy is gone, but the story sounds completely different.
Precisely. And that pocket logic, what some analysts call China-specific grammar, is showing up everywhere in global news right now. It's not about concentration camps in Xinjiang.
No, it's about re-education camps.
Re-education camps. It sounds like a summer program for kids who failed a test.
Or they're not planning to invade Taiwan.
Of course not. They're just going to unify with Taiwan.
Unification.
Yeah.
So much warmer. And then there are the stories about workers who are owed money, and when they ask for their wages, the police get called.
And they get accused of malicious wage seeking.
Malicious wage seeking. You can't make this stuff up. So today on Sip and Talk, we're going to dive into the substance behind these words. Why are people still debating the reality on the ground in Xinjiang? How is that exact same model now threatening Taiwan? And maybe most importantly, why does this threaten all of us?
Let's get into it.
Okay, so first things first. We have to understand that this China-specific grammar, this doublespeak, it isn't like an accident. It's not a bad translation.
No, it's a systemic tool. It is a highly sophisticated top-down strategy. The goal isn't necessarily to fool everyone. It's to create just enough doubt, enough semantic fog to make outside criticism really difficult to stick.
It gives them plausible deniability. And this language, it flows directly from the core identity of their governance model, what experts call the authoritarian model.
Right. And that model, from what we're seeing, really stands on three main pillars. And these pillars are fundamentally at odds with democratic systems.
What's the first one?
The first is state capitalism. So this isn't a free market in the way we think of it. The state really directs the whole show. They use huge subsidies, 5-year plans, all to make sure their companies can outcompete everyone else.
And the second pillar is something we hear a lot about, massive digital surveillance. We're talking facial recognition, AI, big data, creating a society where, personal privacy is basically traded for state control.
And that leads to the third pillar, which is what we're really talking about today. Cognitive warfare, this constant, relentless effort to control the story, both at home and abroad, using language, using influence.
And the central promise of this whole model is basically a bargain.
It's a trade-off. They're saying, look, give up your individual rights, forget about political freedom, or voting out your leaders.
And in return?
In return, we, the state, promise you two things: rapid economic growth and absolute total stability.
And stability is the magic word.
The sacred word. And if you're going to prioritize state stability over, say, human rights, you absolutely have to invent nice-sounding words for the coercion you need to enforce that stability.
Exactly. It brings us right back to the examples. We already talked about malicious wage seeking, which is just a perfect inversion of reality.
It makes the victim into the bad guy. Classic pocket logic.
And historically, we saw this for decades with the term re-education through labor, RTL. It was a system to lock people up, dissidents, without a trial. Now, that specific term, RTL, was officially abolished back in 2013 because of international pressure.
But the practice didn't vanish. It just got a rebrand. Now, the forced movement of people for labor gets packaged under these really positive-sounding names.
Like what?
Like labor transfer programs. Or, my favorite, poverty alleviation.
Poverty alleviation. I mean, that sounds like a United Nations goal. Who in the world is going to criticize a country for trying to lift people out of poverty?
And that's how the language acts as a shield for the coercion. You see the same thing with history. The 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre is, well, it's just gone from the history books.
Right.
or if it is mentioned, it's called a political disturbance, or even more sanitarily, the suppression of counter-revolutionary riots. They'll admit something happened, but they strip away all the moral weight, all the context of what actually occurred.
And this brings us to this just fundamental philosophical gap. It's why a deep partnership between a democracy and this authoritarian model is, at the end of the day, probably impossible.
It's not just a disagreement over, tariffs or trade. The philosopher Karl Popper called it a conflict between the open society and then the closed society. It's a zero-sum game of values.
Let's just quickly define those pillars. So for democracies, the pillars are dispersed power checks and balances. The focus is on accountability. Leaders can and should be criticized, and, they can be voted out.
Crucially.
Yeah.
And individual rights, free speech, assembly are seen as fundamental. The system is actually designed to handle disagreement and chaos.
Now contrast that with the authoritarian pillars. Power is totally concentrated at the top.
Stability is the only goal that matters, which means any kind of dissent, anything that could lead to chaos, has to be shut down immediately.
And your personal freedom, it's a distant second to the needs of the state.
What's so fascinating is just how incompatible these two systems are. I mean, you can have temporary cooperation on things like trade.
Sure, money doesn't have an ideology. They'll sell you things, you'll sell them things.
But that partnership just completely breaks down the second you touch on core values.
Hong Kong is the textbook case, isn't it?
It's the perfect case. The whole idea was one country, two systems. You were supposed to have democratic values coexisting. But the moment those values led to massive protests, the moment freedom clashed with the need for stability,
the system broke.
The conflict became absolute. And the national security law came down, prioritizing stability above all else, and basically crushed those freedoms overnight. So it really boils down to one question. Can the state tolerate different stories? Or does it need to control the one single truth?
And the authoritarian model, by its very nature, has to control the truth. And that China-specific grammar is the weapon it uses to defend that control on the world stage.
So let's apply that whole framework now to the most visible and I think the most disturbing example of this in action, Xinjiang. This is where the gap between the pretty language and the brutal reality is it's breathtaking.
The official story is so carefully constructed. The government calls these places vocational education and training centers.
Right. And the stated purpose is all very noble. It's for anti-terrorism, for poverty relief, for job training, all to help marginalized communities. They're schools. They're not prisons. And the official line for years was that most of them closed back in 2019.
But the buildings themselves tell a very, very different story. And some of the most powerful evidence we have against that official narrative comes from one incredibly brave person, a Chinese citizen named Guan Heng, who goes by Guangwan.
His story is just unbelievable. So in 2020, he decides he's going to find out the truth for himself.
So what did he do?
He drove. He drove deep into Xinjiang, through cities like Urumqi and Hami. He used like a hidden camera, sometimes a long-range lens, and he filmed hours and hours of footage of about 18 of these different sites.
And then he had to get that footage out.
Which was an incredibly dangerous journey in itself. He eventually made it to the U.S. and released a 20-minute video. And that video became this critical piece of civilian testimony because it showed these facilities from the ground, confirming what analysts had only been able to see from satellite images.
And so when outlets like the New York Times or The Economist cross-referenced his footage with the satellite data, what did they find?
They confirmed that these so-called schools had some very distinct features that have absolutely nothing to do with education.
Like what, specifically?
We're talking about massive concrete walls, so high you couldn't possibly climb them, double layers of iron fences, guard towers at the corners of the compounds, windows that are just narrow slits with heavy bars on them.
And his footage even captured signs inside some of these places, right?
That's a crucial detail. Some of the signs explicitly mentioned labor modification. That is the language of a prison, of incarceration. It is not the language of a school.
A community college doesn't need 6 layers of razor wire around the perimeter.
My community college definitely did not. The architecture itself screams control and surveillance. And the scale of this is just staggering.
Satellite analysis showed this network of facilities, tripling in size in just over a year?
Tripling. Between 2017 and 2018, we're talking about over 380 suspected detention facilities. And here's the kicker, the 2025 update. The World Report from Human Rights Watch confirms that the repression has not eased up.
So the claim that they were closed in 2019
is misleading. What seems to have happened is that some of the lower security camps might have been converted into factories, but the state has just transferred over 500,000 Uyghurs from the camps into the formal, high-security prison system. They're just moving people from one box to another while changing the label on the outside.
And all of this has led to this massive wave of international condemnation.
Absolutely. The chain of evidence is now overwhelming. You have the Xinjiang police files that the BBC reported on. You have huge reports from Amnesty International. And, of course, the big one, the 2022 report from the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Let's be really specific about what those reports found. These aren't minor issues.
Not at all. We're talking about mass arbitrary detention. People being locked up without any trial simply because of their ethnicity or their religion. There's evidence of forced assimilation eradicating the Uyghur language, banning Islamic practices.
And the digital surveillance is on another level entirely.
Right. Amnesty International did a deep dive into a system called DeepSeek, and it's basically AI-powered predictive policing on steroids. It pulls together all this data on a person, biometrics, facial scans, who you talk to, how much electricity you use.
Everything.
Everything. And the AI creates a risk score. If the algorithm decides you're a potential threat, you can be detained. Just like that. No due process.
And then there's the whole economic side of it, the forced labor.
The labor transfer programs.
Yeah.
Millions of people have been moved from Xinjiang to factories across the country to make goods for the global market, especially things like clothes and solar panels. And that evidence trail is what led the U.S. to pass the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, the UFLPA.
And the UFLPA is a really big deal, legally speaking.
It is, because it flips the whole script on the burden of proof. It creates what's called a rebuttable presumption, meaning any product made even partially in Xinjiang is automatically assumed to be made with forced labor and is banned from the U.S. The importer now has the responsibility to prove with crystal clear evidence that it wasn't made with forced labor.
So the government doesn't have to prove guilt. The company has to prove innocence.
Exactly. And it's a massive legal tool designed to clean up global supply chains. And all of this evidence, from the videos to the official reports, it all led the UN to conclude that these actions could amount to crimes against humanity.
Which brings us to this moment of just profound and bitter irony.
The story of the whistleblower, Quan Hang.
Right. This man risks absolutely everything. He flees his country, he goes on this perilous journey, all to deliver the ground-level video proof that completely shatters the official vocational school story.
Evidence that journalists and governments around the world used to condemn what was happening. And his reward.
His reward is that he gets detained by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement IC in August 2024 for entering the country illegally.
And as of late 2025, he is still stuck in legal limbo. He's facing possible deportation back to the country he exposed.
The contradiction is just, it's painful. It shows this huge gap between the West's rhetoric about defending human rights and the cold, hard reality of its own immigration laws.
The man who stood for the very values the U.S. claims to champion is now imprisoned by that same system.
And you have to ask, what message does that send? To the next person inside an authoritarian state who's thinking about speaking out, it's a chilling thought.
It's incredibly chilling, and it's the perfect setup for where this model is heading next. Because the lesson of Xinjiang, that you can use re-education to justify ideological control, is no longer just about Xinjiang.
It's now being explicitly applied as a blueprint for Taiwan. This is the transition. It's moving from an ethnic minority to an entire democratic society of 24 million people.
And this is where the language game stops being subtle and becomes a very clear, very direct threat. You have to look at the re-education rhetoric coming straight from top officials.
The most famous example, of course, being Liu She, who was the ambassador to France.
Right. In an interview in 2022, he said it out loud. He said that after unification, the people of Taiwan would need to be re-educated.
And why? What was the reason?
To turn them back into patriots. To get rid of what he called the poison of desynicization.
A poison? I mean, just think about that word choice.
It's deliberate. It reframes democracy not as a legitimate political choice, but as an illness, a contamination that needs to be cured by the state.
And this wasn't just a one-off comment. It was echoed by influential academics like Zhang Weiwei in 2025.
Yeah, he's often positioned as this major thought leader. And he took it even further. He suggested that Taiwan independence will disappear very quickly after unification, and he even compared it to how Nazism collapsed after World War II.
That's an extreme comparison.
It is. And his proposed solution wasn't dialogue. It was decisive action, arresting and prosecuting what he called stubborn elements. Certain politicians, activists, journalists.
So this builds the core logic of control. If you define Taiwan's democracy as a pathology, as a disease,
then you've already justified any coercive measures you want to take. You're not invading a democracy. You're performing a necessary political surgery.
And you can see the deep anxiety behind this language. Taiwan isn't Hong Kong. It's a fully formed, mature democracy. They've been voting for decades. They have a free press.
They have a strong, distinct identity. The international media sees this rhetoric and recognizes it for what it is. A confession that the authoritarian model can't win the argument on its merits, so it has to suppress the argument entirely.
And the whole premise that Taiwan is poisoned with this idea of a separate identity is just not supported by the data on the ground.
Not at all. There are long-term academic surveys, like from National Chengchi University, that track identity, and they consistently show that a strong majority of people on the island identify as Taiwanese, not Chinese, or both.
So this kind of threatening rhetoric often has the opposite effect. It just makes people more determined to defend the freedoms they have.
Which brings us to the price of what they call shaping culture. It's this idea that identity is something the state can manufacture. Zheng Weiwei used this really chilling phrase. He advocated for using thunderous means as a bodhisattva's heart.
What does that even mean?
Well, a bodhisattva is a compassionate, enlightened being. So the phrase implies that the state is acting out of a kind of tough love. We're going to arrest you, we're going to prosecute you, but it's for your own good. It's for the good of the nation.
That is the ultimate justification for control.
It is, and it just completely ignores the immense social cost. You can't just erase decades of free thought and democratic experience without creating massive, long-term resistance. This re-education blueprint shows that the system fundamentally cannot tolerate real ideological competition.
So if that's the end goal, the re-education, what are they doing right now to prepare the ground for it? Because the military threat is one thing, but there's this other subtler war going on.
It's exactly the cognitive warfare campaign. This is the transition from the loud threats to the quiet, pervasive information war that's aimed at the average person.
And it has become incredibly sophisticated. It's not just state TV anymore. It's all about social media. And that brings us to the influencer recruitment scandal that really blew up in 2025.
This was huge. It was exposed by Taiwanese YouTubers themselves, people like Pa Chung and Chen Boyan. They revealed this massive program to essentially buy opinion leaders.
And the amount of money involved was just shocking.
It really was. The report showed they were offering monthly fees of up to 1.5 million Taiwan dollars. That's around 40,000 euros a month for one influencer.
That's not just a small payment. That is a full-blown, state-level foreign influence operation.
And the target audience isn't necessarily politically active people. They're aiming for the young, the undecided, the people who trust their favorite YouTuber way more than they trust a government press release.
And they've perfected this tactic for it, which is just, it's brilliant in a very cynical way. It's called small criticism, big help.
It's so deceptive. So the influencer they've paid doesn't just start by praising the government. That would be too obvious.
Right, people would see right through it.
So they start with a small criticism. Maybe they complain about how hard it is to use credit cards there or how the internet's restricted. Something relatable and seemingly authentic.
It builds credibility. It makes them seem balanced.
Exactly. And then, once they have your trust, they pivot to the big help. They show these beautiful, slickly produced videos of gleaming skyscrapers, high-speed trains, safe streets.
And the unspoken message is devastatingly clear.
It's the Taiwan despair theory. The idea is to make you feel like your democratic home is old, stagnant, and falling apart, while the mainland is this dynamic, unstoppable future.
The goal is to wear down your psychological will to resist, because deep down you start to think maybe resistance is futile, maybe unification is just progress.
The goals are crystal clear. First, divide and conquer. You flood social media with content that amplifies every single domestic problem in Taiwan, real or imagined. You get neighbors arguing with each other about power grids or wages.
And a society that's fighting itself can't unite against an external threat.
Precisely. And the second goal is what we could call tool manipulation. They weaponize content from anyone, even people who have no idea they're being used.
Like the travel vloggers.
Right. A Western influencer like iShowSpeed posts a fun video of his trip, and the state media immediately grabs it, repackages it, and uses it as proof to refute human rights reports. Yeah. They're saying, see, if things were so bad, would this famous American be having such a great time here?
It puts the Democratic side in a really tough position. Taiwan's government had to issue warnings about violating their Anti-Infiltration Act.
But then you immediately run into a wall, because the influencers just claim free speech, and it creates this huge gray area that's designed to paralyze the defense.
Where's the line between a paid agent and just a citizen with an opinion? And when that soft power isn't enough, they switch to hard tactics.
That's when the gloves come off. In late 2025, we saw Chinese police issue public wanted lists, and they specifically named YouTubers and critics living in Taiwan.
It's called long-arm jurisdiction. It's a threat designed to reach across borders.
And it's all about creating fear and self-censorship. If you're a critic in Taipei, you suddenly have to worry. Can your family travel to the mainland safely? What happens if you travel internationally? It makes the personal cost of speaking out feel impossibly high.
At the end of the day, it's about winning the war before a single shot is fired. For 40,000 euros a month, they're trying to convince millions of people that their own democracy is worthless and their powerful neighbor is the future. It's a cheap price to pay if you can get people to give up without a fight.
Okay, so we've connected the dots. We have the language game, the rhetorical manipulation,
Which is used to hide the reality of the authoritarian model,
which was prototyped in Xinjiang.
and is now being psychologically deployed against Taiwan. So now, the biggest question. Why should someone listening in London or Los Angeles care about any of this?
Because this isn't a regional issue anymore. It's a global, systemic conflict. This model of smart authoritarianism, using technology for control, is seen by democratic alliances everywhere as a genuine existential threat.
You can see that in the language from the G7, in motions passed by the Canadian Parliament. They're taking it very seriously.
Let's break down the three main ways this model directly impacts the rest of the world. And the first one starts right in your wallet.
Economic distortion.
Exactly. This goes back to that state capitalism pillar. The huge problem for the global economy is state-backed overcapacity.
The EV market is the perfect example right now. Electric vehicles.
It is. The Chinese state is pouring insane subsidies into its EV manufacturing. The result is a flood of super cheap cars on the global market that companies in Europe or the US, which don't have that kind of state backing, simply cannot compete with.
It's not a level playing field. It's not fair competition.
It's market distortion. It threatens jobs and industries in democratic countries. It's gotten so serious that you have US officials openly saying that international bodies like the IMF or the World Bank should just stop giving loans to China.
Because the money is just being used to fuel this subsidized competition.
The competition isn't between, say, Ford and a Chinese car company. It's between Ford and the entire Chinese state. And that's a battle a private company can't win.
Okay, so that's the economic threat. What's number two?
The erosion of democratic norms. This one is maybe even more dangerous because it's so subtle. The authoritarian model is literally for sale.
They're exporting it.
They're exporting the technology of control. They sell digital surveillance systems, AI-powered censorship tools, facial recognition grids to other authoritarian-leaning regimes all over the world. They're shipping the toolkit of the closed society.
And this erosion happens on the global stage, too, in places like the United Nations.
Right. They become masters at using multilateral bodies, especially the UN Human Rights Council, to block any real scrutiny of their own record. They build voting blocks with other countries to shoot down resolutions investigating abuses in places like Xinjiang.
So they're using the institutions of the open world to protect the closed world.
Which systematically weakens the entire global system for protecting human rights. And then you have the issue of AI development. Their model gives them a huge advantage because they don't have the same ethical or legal constraints about data privacy that we do.
They can just vacuum up huge amounts of data to train their AI models without public debate.
So the race for AI leadership is also a race between two completely different ethical systems for how technology should be used.
And that brings us to the third point, which is geopolitical stability.
The crisis in the Taiwan Strait isn't just a local conflict. That single waterway carries something like 30% of all global trade.
The global tech supply chain, all our phones and computers, basically runs right through there.
Any instability there sends shockwaves through the entire global economy. And China's efforts to reshape the order, whether it's their claims in the South China Sea or their threats to Taiwan, are a direct challenge to the whole system of international law that's been in place for centuries.
They're trying to replace the established rules with their own.
Exactly. The world is really struggling with this question now. Is China a business partner you can work with, or is it a systemic rival whose core values threaten your own? And alliances like our uses are basically saying the answer is clear. Ignoring this ideological fight is no longer an option.
And when you hear that, according to recent reports, almost 60% of the world's population now lives under some form of authoritarian rule, you realize this isn't just an academic debate, it's the defining struggle of our time. And it starts with language.
Wow. We have covered a lot of ground today. From a simple piece of candy in a pocket all the way to global systemic threats. I think I need another sip.
Me too. But just to wrap it all up for everyone listening, the central theme is that this rhetorical manipulation, this China-specific grammar, it's always the first step. It's how you normalize coercion. When you can successfully relabel an invasion as unification or a concentration camp as a re-education center, you've already won a major part of the battle.
And we just want to say again, our goal here on Sip and Talk is to be objective. We're not targeting any group of people or any nation. We are analyzing official statements, factual reports, and expert analysis. We do it just to encourage everyone to think critically.
We want you to always be asking that question. Why are they using these specific words? What's the real intent hiding behind the bureaucratic, positive-sounding language?
Which leads us to our final provocative thought for you to take away today. We've talked about the immense effort and resources that go into this system of control, building hundreds of high-security facilities, investing billions in surveillance tech, paying influencers huge sums of money.
So, think about this. When a state has to use that much force, that much coercion, and that much money just to ensure stability and enforce agreement, isn't that actually a profound sign of weakness? Doesn't it suggest a deep internal lack of confidence in your own system's appeal?
If your ideas are truly great, you shouldn't have to source people to believe them.
A thought for the road. You can build the walls as high as you want, but you can't stop people from thinking.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you all so much for joining us for another Sip and Talk.
If you enjoyed our conversation today, please do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. And before you go, we have to give a quick shout out to our old friend Micky and his YouTube channel, Micky to Life.
Yes, you have to check this out. His latest vlog is about changing an electrical outlet in his house. I know it sounds so boring, but it's strangely compelling, and he just added an English dub. So go find Micky to Life. You won't regret it.
We'll see you next time for more Sip and Talk.
Bye, everyone.